Sauron has no army of his own, so he has lured yours here instead. He wants you to attack Eregion.
True creation needs sacrifice. From ADAR to Celebrimbor. Guys, welcome to Every Screen. Follow me. Let's review this bit by bit. Spoiler alert. Lastly, we have a truly fantastic episode of The Lord of the Rings, The Rings of Power on Amazon. Think of me as astonishing. This is partially because the least interesting subplots from the show are absent. Thank the Valar. There were no Harfoots or stores and no Númenórean nonsense. Not Tom Bombadil from the penny store, nor Gandalf. All of these things are absent, which lets the show concentrate on its strong points. Here, those strengths are clearly visible, albeit I say that with certain caveats that I shall address shortly. Let's first discuss the aspects of Doomed to Die, Episode 7, that were successful. I want to give the actors credit where credit is due. As Natar, Charlie Vickers is still just fantastic. This episode, Sauron and even his wig appeared a little less tacky. Better, but not terrific. Refer to the top image. The hair appears more natural and is cut less uniformly. As for Charles Edwards, he is great as Celebrimbor and does a great job in what is perhaps his largest and most important episode, despite the fact that, as I've pointed out, he is too old to portray an immortal elf who is younger than Galadriel. Yes, I worry that Elvin Smith's next episode will be much more significant, and not in a positive way, but this was the one in which he truly excelled. Great situations occur when Celebrimbor starts to realize how much of an illusion he has been living under. He observes that the mouse keeps showing up. Fëanor's hammer's ruby is missing. All day, the candles haven't burned out. Natar tries to dissuade the smith from realizing the truth as he starts to realize it, all the while sowing doubts about Celebrimbor's sanity in the minds of the elven warriors and Celebrimbor's helper Myrddania. Later on, Celebrimbor tells them to cut open Natar to show that his blood is black ichor and babbles on about the mouse and the ruby in an attempt to alert them that they have been duped. Natar extends his hand to them.
Get your hands off me!
Get your hands off me! Is yelled by Celebrimbor as he attempts to be led away by Myrddania, and the blood is red. Then Sauron casts the elven woman off the ramparts with his sorcery, giving the impression that the smith did the actual throwing. After being brought back to the forge, Natar restrains him to the workstation with cuffs. I really like Robert Aramayo as the role of Elrond. The bond between Elrond and Owain Arthur's Durin Ford was one of the nicest aspects of Season 1, and they get back together in this most recent episode. The Dwarven prince agrees to send his dwarves to Eregion when Elrond begs him for help. The dwarves have largely accepted their king is gone to the ring, and Durin the Younger offers a passionate speech. Everything appears to be going well until a second dwarf tells his prince that the king is going deeper and will soon come across the beast beneath. If Durin doesn't stop his father, instead of supporting the elves, Khazad-dûm will be lost. A moment more on this. Elrond returns to combat, and I honestly loved every moment of it, but especially the last one, when he kneels on the battlefield and declares,
Durin will come.
Durin will come, while the dwarves are nowhere to be found. Durin is going to arrive. Very little. William Wallace's desperation after his allies betray him in Braveheart comes to mind. You know things are going well if I'm reminded of Braveheart. Elrond stops the elven charge and agrees to meet with the half-elf, half-orc commander when he discovers that Adar, now portrayed by Sam Hazeldine in one of the better recastings I can think of, has Galadriel, Morfydd Clark. This is the point at which things almost go out of hand. Elrond requests permission to say goodbye when he declines to give Galadriel the ring in return. Then, after giving Galadriel a really passionate kiss, I briefly felt, now this is just too much. This program is absurd. Galadriel and Elrond don't exist. Luckily, it was all a pretext to fool Adar and give Galadriel a lockpick so she could get away. Though it's still ridiculous, it's not unbelievably awful. Now for some quibbles. What this all goes to prove is that despite all the substandard, lore-breaking bullshit that has held this show down since day one, there was a good show hidden behind it. As I mentioned last week, Celebrimbor moments were very nice. The Rings of Power would have been far superior if they had merely begun with this relationship. It would have stayed with the real books if they had just fashioned the rings in the correct order, rather than having Celebrimbor rush the first three. They could have concentrated on and developed the Eregion narrative if they had simply postponed telling the entire Numenor saga until a later season. Right now, it seems as though the real Rings of Power material have been pushed aside to make way for petty, backwater politics and Harfoot pranks of the Numenorians. What a great shame this is. At this point, the series has been so badly rushed, messed up, and squished that no number of better episodes would be able to salvage it from its own reckless producers and from themselves. In the same way, the Dwarven scheme seems out of place since Durin III gets corrupted by the Ring so quickly, and because the Seven were not distributed until after Eregion fell, if we can overlook the chronological mistakes. Once more, a really intriguing tale is wasted in this instance. The fact that Durin III and his son had such a tense relationship in Season 1 does not help either. If they had been more friendly and close from the beginning, the king's deterioration and his desire for wealth and gold would have had much more of an impact. I'm also perplexed as to how the dwarves are aware of the Balrog, and that Durin's recent excavation will cause it to awaken, or why the dwarven host couldn't be split in order to stop the king while the rest marched to Eregion. The writing is still not consistent. For example, Mr. Nick of Time himself, Arondir, Ismael Cruz Cordova, saves Celebrimbor seconds before, and Galadriel saves him. He informs Galadriel, "It is not strength that overcomes darkness, but light." That in and of itself is a very delicate line. However, they force him to say 6 additional phrases that essentially restate the same idea in progressively more complex ways. Why? Why strangle your perfectly good dialogue line with a bunch of unmemorable tag-ons? It's still not as bad as it is in a lot of other episodes. Though I say fewer rather than none at all, there are also fewer callbacks and instances of Lord of the Rings plagiarism. We'll address that later. This show's dialogue in particular is disorganized most of the time. Whenever I think nothing particularly noteworthy is happening, something always seems to jump out of the rush and bite me. Though I believe they would have done a better job of pulling this off if Arondir had been traveling to Eregion the entire time, rather than lolling around with Theo and Isildur, I don't mind him showing up in this manner. It's just another annoyance associated with fast travel. The death they dealt to the elven archer Ryan, who bravely performed her job despite receiving a lot of orc arrows and receiving the Boromir treatment, bothers me more. Considering how little of a character she had, that seems completely undeserved. Even though it would have still been a parody of Boromir's sorrowful and far more significant death, Arondir's death would have made far more sense. Instead, Arondir was stabbed and left for dead by ADAR, though it's extremely unlikely he actually is dead. The only characters in this episode doomed to die are minor ones introduced this season. Maybe he'll die off-screen between seasons like Bronwyn. Those poison orc blades really do have a delayed reaction. Other than this, I found the battle sequences to be generally rather enjoyable, despite the fact that they were a little disorganized and lacked any sort of plan. The techniques themselves, or lack thereof, are illogical. The armies of the orcs and elves both lack tactical awareness. The showrunners have no grasp of physics or how siege engines work. Even if Galadriel was a hostage, the elves never should have abandoned their mission for her. When the horses charged, the orcs never should have left the muck. Even though you could go over the entire battle with a fine-tooth comb and identify dozens of severe issues, it would be easier to just switch off your brain and watch them bash into each other. There are moments when I just have to do that with this show. Flip off my brain like a light switch. A light switch is mightier than both the light and the dark. Look, I've seen so much awful combat in TV programs at this point. I guess I've come to anticipate them. It was, at least, not as horrible as Season 1's Battle for the Mud Village. Because of Sauron's influence, I can overlook Erigion's very blah defense. As soon as he gets his hands on the Nine, which Celebrimbor completes and then uses to chop off his own thumb in order to escape, he is content to let Eregion fall, keeping all of his adversaries occupied. After giving them to Galadriel, he takes a few elven troops with him so she can gain some time to flee. After Sauron employs his evil sorcery to force them to murder each other, Celebrimbor is left helpless. Though it's unclear how Sauron will remove the rings from Galadriel, I think there will be a really terrifying scene between the two next week. But one ring is already taken. When Elrond said to ADAR that he hadn't brought Galadriel's ring to the fight, he was lying. "Have you forgotten your Rumil?" ADAR asks him as he grabs him on the battlefield and raises Elrond above him. Never wage war out of rage. Out of disgust, he tosses Elrond to the ground and tears the ring off of his neck. Elven scholar Rumil created the alphabet for his race and authored several other significant works, such as the Silmarillion's account of creation. Instead of follow your nose and other silly Easter eggs, I wish this program would make more nuanced allusions to lore. Nonetheless, ADAR appears incredibly strange in these final images, as if they did some reshoots and got the lighting all wrong. All things considered, this could have been a really good, entertaining examination of the Second Age of Middle-earth if the show had been as good as this episode up to this point, had it concentrated on the forging of the rings instead of all the other stuff, and had it chosen to tell this story first rather than compress everything and get all the events out of order. It is not required to be flawless. There are some corny lines. Not every battle has to be as great as Helm's Deep. Adar and Arondir are two new characters that I don't mind. The elves' increased diversity is okay with me, but it's really too little, too late, having taken such an agonizingly long time to arrive here. The best portion of the show is over now that the Anatar, Celebrimbor plot is mostly over. There may be one more episode left, though. Though I assume the third season will center on either the destruction of Numenor or the Nine Rings contaminating the human world, I'm not sure what they'll do. When did the timeline get so disorganized? Scattered thoughts. You told us you loved us, the Orc lieutenant tells Adar. With all that is left of my heart, is his response. Too much to allow you to be slaves to Sauron. The emphasis on the Orc's fear of dying bothers me, but I wonder if, when the Orc finally leaves the battle unseen, we're just meant to view him as a coward above all else. On the other hand, when Sauron offers the Orcs a different path, they might decide that Adar has made too many sacrifices and turn against him. Gilad was a fierce fighter who used a spear. At the end of the episode, there were some really awesome battle sequences between him and Arondir, but the elves still use shoddy strategies. They could have done a better job of portraying the dwarven betrayal, in my opinion. Why didn't Durin rally his supporters and try to flee Khazad-dûm, only for his father to use the ring's power to instantly kill him, stopping him from fleeing and putting the prince and his allies in custody? This would be a lot more thrilling than fretting that Durin could dig down to the Balrog by himself, with all the related goofiness. I'm relieved that no one is spreading the rumors that Myrddania is actually Celebrian, Galadriel's daughter. We'll never be able to find out the whereabouts of Celeborn, her husband, who vanished. Because of how much of the story it breaks, some people are telling me that this is the worst episode yet. I believe that the damage was already done, and that I have already taken into consideration the fact that the great majority of the lore breaking has already occurred, particularly with regard to Anatar and Celebrimbor. I'm currently evaluating the program based on how it handles the hand that has already been dealt to us. I'm not sure, but maybe that's grading on a curve. Since they can't really fix all they've broken, I believe that what matters most is how things are carried out moving forward. And this episode did a fantastic job with its main characters. Is it still a complete failure that destroys Tolkien's writings and essentially disregards mountains of source material? It is, of course. The harm that has already been done cannot be undone by one excellent episode, or the one that I felt was better than the others. How did this episode strike you? Folks, I just call it like I see it, even though I know some of you will think I've gone soft. Although the rest of the program has been a disorganized, mediocre mess, this episode was excellent, and I wish it had continued at this caliber. Although it still wouldn't have been excellent, it would have sufficed. Tell me what you think about the comment section. Subscribe to my YouTube channel. Thanks for watching.